I wanted him to see that there's a whole world of people here who really care about women's rights.
I am strong.
I am strong.
Ginger Rogers did everything that Fred Astaire did. She just did it backwards and in high heels.
What if, in raising children, we focus on ability instead of gender?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Katie Couric. I'm thrilled to be here with these two badass women, all you badass women, and a few good men. So, we've got a lot to get to. Cecile, you know, obviously two strong women. I can't wait to hear how to raise a feminist daughter and how much I screwed up raising mine. But first, Planned Parenthood. We have to talk about that, Cecile. It's been under siege in recent weeks, really in recent months. You escaped being defunded when the health care bill was pulled.
Yes, we did.
Yeah.
Yes, we did.
But,
that's right.
But states are now no longer prohibited from withholding funds to organizations that provide health care and abortions like Planned Parenthood. Republicans in Pennsylvania, as you know, are the first to propose doing just that. On the international front, the Trump administration wants to stop funding the UN agency that provides family planning services in more than 150 countries. Clearly, reproductive rights are in the crosshairs. So what has it been like, and what is your strategy moving forward?
So, yes, I think as we saw the pictures of the marches, and those were extraordinary. I think it's important to say those are the largest marches in the history of the United States of America, the marches for women's rights. And they happened the day after the inauguration, I think, because women believed that there was a lot at stake, and we found out actually just how much is at stake. Obviously, the first day of this administration, they instituted the global gag rule, and it's the most expansive ever, which not only is cutting off healthcare services to women, maternity services, HIV/AIDS prevention programs, Zika programs, and then, of course, just this week, as you said, they're ending family planning programs through the UN. And then we've been dealing with the attempts to defund Planned Parenthood. I think it has engaged women in a way like I've never seen in my lifetime, and not just women. I hope you saw in those marches, it wasn't just women, it was men as well. Because I think increasingly in this country, fathers want their daughters to have every opportunity that their sons have, and that means people are going to stand and fight. So it's been rougher than I actually thought. They've come at us and come at women in a way that is much harsher than I even imagined. But what keeps me going is that every single day our doors stay open at Planned Parenthood. 8,118 people on average get health care, and that's worth going to work for every single day.
Chimamanda, do you think sort of this assault on Planned Parenthood in a way is a proxy, and it's really about the strides and the progress women have made in general?
Yes. I think Planned Parenthood, and can I just say how just fantastic it is for me to be sitting here with both of you, really. It's just the most incredible thing.
Right back at you.
I think Cecile does just such an interesting, important work. But I think that Planned Parenthood represents so much. It represents all the progress that American women have made. And I think it also, in some ways, represents that idea that women can be sexual beings. Because I think there's a lot about the discourse that really is about not just controlling women's bodies, but also saying that women cannot be sexual without consequences, in a way that men can. And I think that Planned Parenthood has become a symbol for all of that, and it's just terrible how it's just constantly being attacked.
Cecile, I know you've done some polling about supporters of Planned Parenthood, and you got some very interesting results. Can you share those with us?
Sure. Well, I mean, the interesting thing to me is, Katie, that the more they go after, or that politicians go after women's health care, the more support for Planned Parenthood grows. And in fact, I think the day before the non-vote on the health care bill, the vote that didn't happen, actually, Fox News reported that the most popular political entity fighting on the healthcare side was Planned Parenthood. I mean, and Fox News had to report that. That was pretty astounding. We are now, the same day, a Quinnipiac poll showed that 80% of Americans believe that Planned Parenthood should continue to get federal funding for the health care that we provide. That's a big number. And yeah, which is great to know. I think that
50% of Trump supporters support Planned Parenthood.
That's right. And of course, because a lot of Trump supporters are patients, because we see everybody in this country. And folks don't come to us to make a political statement. They come because they need access to affordable health care, and that's not a partisan issue in America, and it certainly shouldn't be. And I wish the U.S. Congress would understand that. And frankly, if we had more members of the United States Congress that could get pregnant, we would quit fighting about Planned Parenthood and access to reproductive health care.
Chimamanda, you grew up in Nigeria. You still spend a lot of time, about half your time there, right?
Yes.
And are reproductive rights top of mind for women in Nigeria?
I think they are for women everywhere in the world, really. I think in Nigeria, it's a bit more complicated because you cannot get a legal abortion, for example, and rates of maternal mortality are very high. I actually had a family friend who died in childbirth 2 weeks ago. She has 3 children and she died in childbirth. I think it's important, but in some ways the conversations are different, right? Because abortions, for example, are illegal in Nigeria. And of course, as happens everywhere in the world where abortions are illegal, it's not that women are not getting abortions, it's that women, especially women who cannot afford them, are not getting safe abortions.
That's right. It's such an important point, Chimamanda. I'm greatly glad you said that, because that's what's so devastating, is that women are now going to die as a result of U.S. policies. Probably in the U.S., but definitely around the world. And of course, it's the women who have the least access to health care already. And we made enormous progress under the Obama administration in reducing maternal mortality around the world. And my fear is that those rates are going to go up again.
I know that you realize that girls did not have equal opportunity in Nigeria. When you were just 9 years old, you wanted to be the class monitor. You got the highest score on the test. You wanted to walk around with a cane. We have a picture of you as a little girl, by the way. You wanted to walk around the classroom with a cane telling people to be quiet. But despite the fact that you got the highest score, you were told a girl could not be the class monitor.
Yes, and my teacher, she said she had forgotten to mention it because she thought it was obvious that it had to be a boy. But what she had said was whoever gets the highest score on the test, I got the highest score, and so I was quite keen to be monitor and get the cane. And then the thing was, the poor kid, the boy, didn't want to be class monitor.
Because he was kind of a kind, gentle boy.
Unlike certain people. But,
and you, meanwhile, really wanted that.
But he had to be because he was a boy. And it was a very striking moment for me, and I've never forgotten it. Because it was, and it's not to say that I hadn't observed before then the ways in which the world just doesn't extend the same courtesies to girls as it does to boys, but it was one of those crystallizing moments. I remember thinking, I'm so angry. I'm so angry that I can't be what I want to be because I'm a girl.
I know that you've written books, you've given 2 TED Talks, you've just published a feminist manifesto and 15 suggestions, which I loved, really telling a friend of yours who had just had a baby how to raise a feminist child. Lots of wisdom in the book. Let me throw out a couple of things you say in the book, and then you can elaborate, but not too long, because we're trying to get so much in our time. Beware the danger of what you call feminism light. What's feminism light?
Feminism light is the idea of conditional female equality. It's the idea that you're not equal to a man, but a man has to treat you nicely. So, and for me, it's deeply dehumanizing because it suggests that a woman's well-being depends on the benevolence of a man. And I think it's in some ways even more dangerous than simply not being feminist.
You also say you talk about shared responsibility, reject the language of help. In your TED Talk, I thought it was great when you say, when a man changes a diaper, the woman says thank you. But when the woman changes a diaper, no one says thank you.
And I'm just really tired of men being thanked for doing things they should do anyway. I think,
Even your own husband, right?
I mean, really.
I know your own husband. You get sick of him being overpraised.
By my family, because he's an equally attentive parent, as he should be. And my family and his family would go, oh, how wonderful. Oh, he actually changed that. Oh, and I'm just thinking, yes, that's what he should bloody well do.
You also say reject likability. Why do women seem to care so much about being liked? I know the number one question that my friends and colleagues get asked about me is she nice in person? And so is that because women are still valued most of all because of their niceness?
It's because there's a terrible, dangerous, insidious cultural mindset that says to women, you need to be liked. I think it's nice to be liked. We all like to be liked, even men, I mean, everybody. But it's women who are raised with that, and we internalize it, and so it shapes everything we do, right? It's the same reason, I think, that many women who are sexually assaulted sometimes hold back from speaking out. Women who are in positions that they find difficult and uncomfortable, but they're still worried about their likability. They're still worried about, how can I tell this subordinate that he or she isn't doing something right, but still be liked? And I'm just thinking, no, just be yourself and do your job. Somebody's going to like you.
Speaking of not being liked, Cecile, I can imagine, by some people, because obviously I can only imagine. In fact, I've heard things said about you on talk radio, on social media. How have you developed, Cecile, a thick skin so you can deal with things and so they don't get to you? I imagine you got a little help watching your mom, the late, great Ann Richards.
So,
Yes.
give it up for Ann Richards. Yeah. But I mean, I come from, it's like I was born under a lucky star and had a feminist mother, and who understood kind of, if you weren't pissing someone off, you probably weren't actually making any progress. And so I think it is important if you're going to stand up for what you believe in, and particularly these days when I think, to me, the definition of feminism now is like, get in the game. Feminism cannot be sort of a passive identity. It has to be something that we stand up and fight for. But I will say, I do think people have this impression because, of course, I think there's some loud voices out there who denigrate Planned Parenthood, or perhaps me personally. But for every one of them, there are 20 people who will stop me on the street and say, thank you for what Planned Parenthood does. Planned Parenthood saved my life. Planned Parenthood was there for me when I didn't have health insurance. That's the first place I went to get birth control. And it's even unlikely, folks. I remember I was at the airport the other day coming down the escalator, and there was kind of a big burly guy in a uniform, and he said, "Are you that woman from Planned Parenthood?" And you never know. I said, "Yes, I am." He says, "Well, thank you very much, because my wife and my daughter get health care from Planned Parenthood." So I think we have an image that is actually not necessarily correct. And I've never been prouder to be with an organization.
What kind of advice did your mom give you? I think you probably learned a lot just from watching her, but that you've been able to share with your children, especially Lily, your daughter, who's now involved in Democratic politics.
Right. Well, I think it's like, stand up for your values, and when you do, you'll actually find more people that come up to you and say, "I'm glad you said that, because I was sort of thinking." And I think particularly for women, sometimes we're a little worried about getting out there and just having a point of view. Although I am incredibly excited about young people, not young women in particular, but young people in general, who are much more willing, I think now, in social media to stand up for what they believe and stand up for their values. They're what really give me hope about the future of this country.
When we were getting ready to come on stage, I said to Cecile, "I really miss your mom." So I asked them to pull this moment at the 1988 Democratic Convention because it was one of her most famous lines. Let's take a look.
Poor George. He can't help it. he was born with a silver foot in his mouth.
What do you think your mom would be saying about our current president?
Of course, I wish I knew. It's probably we couldn't repeat it here, but I think she could give him a go with 140 characters every day.
She would be hell on Twitter, wouldn't
It's
she?
too bad Twitter, came along after her time. But in all seriousness, people ask me a lot of times about now what would mom do? Actually, a lot of women just ask me. I'm sure they asked you too, Chimamanda, like what do we do now? And I think what mom would say is, you only get one life. This is it. So make a difference now. And certainly don't wait for instructions. And I think that's what's so encouraging, is to see what women are doing now. I think taking charge, speaking out, speaking up in a way that frankly has never happened in my lifetime.
What about Ivanka Trump? In a recent interview, Cecile, you said, quote, "It's time for Ivanka to stand for women." When asked by Gayle King why she wasn't speaking out more on these issues, she said, "I would not conflate lack of public denouncement with silence." What's your reaction to that?
It sounds like alternative facts.
Well, I mean, look, I think things have really changed. She's now one of the highest ranking women in the White House. And you look at this administration, and I've lived through a lot of them, I think women should ask, are we better or worse off than we were, 3 months ago? And I think without a question, we're a lot worse off, not only on attacks on women's health care. You saw, I think Tina showed the scene in the White House of a bunch of white men basically deciding that women didn't need to get maternity care anymore in this country. Now the most recent story saying that they're actually going to get rid of the pre-existing conditions so that we can actually, women were able to get health insurance coverage. Now talking about allowing insurance companies to charge women more. You just go down the list, and I feel like anyone who works in this White House is responsible for addressing why women are in the crosshairs of basically every single policy that we've seen out of this administration. Yep.
Chimamanda, when I was watching your first TED Talk, I thought, my God, men in Nigeria are really behind the times. You spend half your time, as I said, here in the United States. So what have you experienced or observed about feminism in this country? Are we doing a better job than they are in Nigeria?
Not necessarily, no. That we're having this conversation, I find it really interesting that that the US is supposed to be ostensibly the leader of the world, and women's rights are so tenuous. It's just really startling. I think that misogyny exists everywhere in the world. I think it manifests itself differently in different places. I think it helps when you have institutions and laws. That's what happens in the US. So you have institutions and laws that mostly help, not enough in my opinion, in a way that Nigeria doesn't. I think that's a function really of the fact that Nigeria is relatively a young nation. And not necessarily that Nigerian men are worse. I think male privilege is a global thing. And I think, for example, that the idea of women having power is something that maybe Nigerians do a bit better than Americans. When you look at the Nigerian government, for example, more women are sort of active and present, and talking about women and power isn't as loaded and as layered and as ugly as it is in this country. If Hillary Clinton had run for president in Nigeria, she would not have gotten the kind of misogynistic, ugly coverage that she got in this country. Yep. But I do think that she would have had to, at every interview, tell us that she cooks for her husband. Otherwise, Nigerians would not vote for her.
I know that both of you feel, we have to enlist boys and men in the fight. Yeah. And I think that's become much more commonplace for people to say that, like Emma Watson. How do we change the way we raise boys? You have a son, Cecile. Would he consider himself a feminist?
Daniel is as fierce a feminist as his two sisters, I can tell you. And of course, he did grow up with a grandmother who was the governor, so I think it sort of was imprinted at an early age. But we were just laughing earlier because I'm very proud. When Daniel was, He went to college in a Midwestern small school, and where he was not only the social secretary of his fraternity, but also the vice president for the Reproductive Rights Club. And so one way or the other, he pretty much knew everybody on campus. But I do think I really have seen, and we see at Planned Parenthood, not only we see young men as patients. About 10% of our patients are young men who come for testing and treatment for STDs, and they are activists. They are fully committed to the idea of feminism. And I actually do believe there is a generational shift, as I said earlier, when I see so many, fathers and grandfathers and sons and brothers marching for women's rights. That, to me, we've reached a tipping point, I think.
Chimamanda, how do you think we need to change the way we're bringing up boys?
I think what I've been thinking about lately is that we need to deconstruct the way we've constructed masculinity. Because I think that it's also bad for men. I think feminism is something for women and men. I've never believed that feminism is sort of a party just for women. I think men have to be on board. And sometimes there's a sadness to realizing that masculinity, even though it comes with privileges, is also a cage that limits men. And I've lately been thinking about how about we start to use shame. And hear me out, because I don't like shame. but there's a sense in which what if we taught little boys to be ashamed of things like excessive macho-ness, to be ashamed of not being able to express their emotions, to be ashamed of the idea of an ego? What if we raise boys that way? In other words, just raise them to think of masculinity as something very different from what we think about it today. In some ways, I think this generation, it might be too late for the adults, but I think there is hope for the kids being born now.
I know that also in your book, you write, try not to use words like misogyny and patriarchy. They're too jargony. So how should we change the language that we're using to make feminism less off-putting for certain people?
I really believe in the power of storytelling. And so, the reason that I think that jargon doesn't always work is, sometimes you say patriarchy, people don't know what the heck you're talking about. But if you said you're criticizing ambition in Katie Couric, but you're not criticizing ambition in Joe Brown, that's not a good thing. And the child sees that, right? Instead of saying, oh, this is about the patriarchal. I just feel that, and not to say, of course, that labels are fine, maybe for academia, but for the real world, I think that we need to get to the level of example, the level of story. I think that's what reaches people. That's what makes people start to see things differently. I think emotion is what makes people change or willing to change their minds.
It used to drive me crazy that all these young women, not my daughters, by the way, would refuse to call themselves feminists. Do you think that's changing, Cecile, because there has been sort of this reawakening about women's rights, given what we're experiencing right now?
Yeah, I think women are woke in this country, and it's awesome to see. And in fact, I just want to, at a time in which obviously we're dealing with the most incredible assault on just things that women fought for years. Right? That women have spent decades getting. Not only did the marches happen, as we said, but one of the things that I learned just recently, as some of you know, in some of the efforts to end access to Planned Parenthood or to repeal the Affordable Care Act and all these benefits for women, the congressional switchboard has literally been shut down. There have been so many people calling. In fact, the day that Speaker Paul Ryan announced he was going to defund Planned Parenthood, you could not get a call into his office.
And didn't you find that like 85% of the people who actually call Capitol Hill are women?
Well, that was what I was going to say. This is the incredible thing, is that's where this energy has come from. I think the most recent thing I saw is that of this patch-through phoning where women call members of Congress, or people do, 85% of them are women. So women didn't just march, they're now actually going to town hall meetings, speaking to their members of Congress, calling, and really taking action. And to me, that says more than any label says about it. It says women actually have a sense of self-worth and the value of, I think, really public participation.
What is the most... go ahead, I'm sorry.
I just want to say really quickly, I also do think the label is important, though. I think, because I think that we need a name. We need a name for something, right? Yes. And one of the reasons I decided to one of my things is to go out and reclaim that name, feminist. There are many black and brown women in this country who are uncomfortable with that word, and I think understandably so, because the history of Western feminism was racist and excluded them. But I also think that we've come to the point where we can re-own it and retake it and make it this complex, multi-thing that it should be. Because, if we don't name it, and some people have said to me, well, why do you call yourself a feminist? Just say you're a humanist. I'm like, well, no, because, it's a different thing. And the problem is about women, so we need to name it.
In fact, I wanted to ask Cecile, how can we make sure the feminist daughters we're raising aren't just the progeny of affluent, well-educated white women?
Right. I know. I think, and I love what Chimamanda said, because I do think it is reclaiming this word, and I think it's also what it means to raise a feminist son or daughter, is that feminism isn't about you. It's not about your rights. It's about believing in equal rights for all women. And as we know, and I think as a lot of the fights that we're all in now, and I think as intersectionality has become much more a common understanding, is that the barriers that women face are immense, and they are all over the place. I look at the patients at Planned Parenthood. I mean, they're facing barriers because of not being able to access sexual and reproductive health care, but they are immigrants. They are refugees. They are facing barriers because of that. They are LGBT people. They are facing, so understanding that feminism is about a belief in everyone, not just an individual.
What is the most effective thing that women and men who believe in these causes can do? Because I think that's one of the things. How do you move the ball forward? After the Women's March, I think people thought, okay, where do we go from here?
Right. I mean,
well, first of all, you write a check to Planned Parenthood. Sorry, no, really, my first act of resistance after this president won was to write a check to Planned Parenthood.
Well, thank you. I think it is that, and people are already doing, but it is, don't give up. And do not let a single politician take away the rights of women in this country. I mean, it is absolutely, we have to stand up and we have to fight that.
How do you do that practically?
That means practically you march, you go to town hall meetings, you call your members of Congress. I can tell you, members of Congress, I spend a lot of time in Washington, D.C., they are terrified of having town hall meetings now because women in pink pussy hats are there waiting for them, and that makes a big difference.
And by the way, I think we should point out that members of Congress really pay attention when you call.
They
actually have somebody in their office logging the call, logging what you're saying, and telling them. So it really does make a difference. I think people don't realize that.
It does make a difference, and again, I don't want to overstate the case, but one of the signature reasons why I believe this Affordable Care Act was not repealed, why women did not lose their access to Planned Parenthood immediately, access to maternity benefits, access to insurance, was because women continued to march and call Congress and show up at town hall meetings and make a difference. And I hope that people learned a lesson from that public participation and speaking up and speaking out can absolutely change the direction of this government. And that's what we're going to have to do.
So we're almost out of time, but Chimamanda, in closing, there are a lot of parents here, or future parents. So what do you think is the most important piece of advice when it comes to raising the next generation of feminists, boys and girls?
I think it would probably be something that seems a bit contradictory, which is don't think about gender and also be very alert to gender. By which I mean, I think that even the most progressive parents often find themselves falling into that rote idea of you're a boy and you're a bit too whiny and you're crying too much and that's not really okay because you're a boy, that sort of thing. So that's what I mean about just think of children as individuals, but then on the other hand, it's important to be alert about gender and the expectations around gender because we live in a world that is so horribly gendered. And so I think both are kind of connected. I just think, I mean, for me, I think that the major problem is the way we've constructed gender and also the binary nature of it. I just think it's really dangerous because what happens is we don't see people as individuals. We see people as sort of this group. You're a woman, therefore you should be so-and-so. Therefore you should be nice in person, right? And it's very problematic. I think if we start to raise children to completely discount all of those expectations.
I do think that's changing, though. I mean, per your earlier point, Cecile, the younger generation is viewing gender identity and gender roles very differently.
Absolutely. Look, and I know we're out of time, but I'll just say I think the most important thing right now, women's rights are under assault in this country and in some areas around the world. There has never been a better opportunity to raise a feminist, Take him to the marches, take him to Congress, speak up and speak out. That's the most important thing we could be doing right now for the next generation.
Well,
And I feel like women need to know that they matter. They matter. Women matter equally. Sometimes, it's easy to forget that living in a world like this. Women matter.
all right. Well, that's
Bravo.
the last word. Chimamanda and Cecile, thank you both so much.
Thank you, Christine.
Thank you.